The Woman in White. My earliest memory is of dying. I was 4 years old, holding my mother's hand, walking to church alongside her. She was wearing high heels and a blue skirt, patterned with red cherries and pears. As we walked, I saw a park across the street, complete with a swing set and slide, and decided that I wanted to be there, so I wrenched free of my mother's hand and ran out into the street. My mother screamed and lunged for me, but she was too late. I was halfway across the road when a large gray truck sped around the corner. Don't worry. It missed me. The truck swerved and slammed on its brakes, skidding to a stop with me on one side and Mom on the other. With this obstacle in her path, I had enough of a head start to continue my sprint toward the park. I was deaf to her screams, now infused with anger, rather than mortal panic, as I sped underneath one of the park's giant elm trees, the coveted swing set drawing nearer with every tiny step. And then, just as suddenly as I had taken off, I collapsed, skidding to an ungraceful halt on the ground, spoiling my Sunday best with grass stains and dirt. I was being chased. From below, my friends cheered wildly. I was the undisputed champion of time tag and had been all summer. But my title was in jeopardy. Zach was gaining fast. He and I were the only two players left, and the timer on my wristwatch said I only had to evade him for 23 more seconds. But why? I asked myself as I skinned my knee against the bark. Had I climbed this stupid tree? I had more questions, too, like, who am I? Where did Mom go? And why am I so much bigger now? Higher and higher we climbed. Zach could almost reach out and touch me. 14 seconds. I slid myself along a branch, hoping to reach another one nearby. Instead, my shoe skidded across a patch of smooth wood, and down I went. My stomach seemed to fall at a different speed than the rest of me. I hadn't realized I'd climbed so high. I hit the ground, not with a thud, but with a revolting crunch. I'd landed on my back, and had felt my ribs all break at once. There was no pain, just a peculiar, powerful tightening in my chest like I was being squeezed by a giant snake. I was going to have to go to the hospital, and my parents couldn't afford it. How could I have been so stupid? Dad's going to unalive me, I thought hazily, assuming I don't die right here and now. I was vaguely aware of the swing set off to the side, wafting in the summer breeze, and of my friends gathering around me in reverence. As my mind faded back into reality, a high-pitched beeping cut the silence like a scalpel, signaling that I was still the undisputed champion of time tag. I awoke, terribly confused, in the shade of the giant elm. I heard shouts and sat up to see the driver of the gray truck running over to me, my mother trailing behind barefoot, clutching her high heels. When she reached me, she dropped her shoes and took my face in both her hands. "Are you all right?" she said, her voice utterly frantic. "What happened to you?" "Tripped," I said, because it seemed like the thing to say, I suppose. In truth, I had no idea what had happened to me. I couldn't even begin to process it. She let out her breath in a rush and clutched my head tightly to her breast. "Don't you ever do that again," she said. "I won't, Mom," I replied. It was the first time I died. It would be far from the last. It's amazing, the things you don't think of when you're only 8 years old. Though I'd never told anyone about it, I remembered clearly the strange and terrible experience I'd had on that misbegotten walk to church. And I, along with every other child in town, was constantly reminded of the dangers of climbing trees. The sad case of Quinn Pleasance, a local kid who had died years earlier after falling from a tree, was happily weaponized by the adults as a cautionary tale. There was an obvious connection to be made between these two occurrences, but somehow, I had not yet made it. That wouldn't be true for much longer. It was the summer of 2009. I was walking with my best friend Caden down Main Street in Swiss Knife, which I still call my hometown even though I haven't lived there in over a decade now. Before you ask, it's named after the Swiss Knife River. You could ask me how that river got its name, but as I'm not an encyclopedia, I couldn't tell you. Look, the point is, we'd just gotten out of a movie at the Sticky Shoe, which was the universally, and affectionately, used moniker for our town's dollar theater. No need to ask where that name came from. It was summer, so the street was hot. The movie had been good, so we were excited. And yet, a chilly sense of turmoil rested unspoken between us. The past few months had been bad for my parents, so bad that my mother had begun hinting that she and I would not be residents of Swiss Knife for much longer. As for my dad, well, he didn't talk to me much anymore. Or even look at me, for that matter. Between the two of them, there was a carnival of bitterness and betrayal to which I would be oblivious until years later. All I knew then was that these summer days in Swiss Knife, with Caden, and with the Sticky Shoe, might be running out, and thus they were filled with a sense of urgency that could at times verge on ruinous. Still, the dread was buried deep on this particular July afternoon, as my best friend and I strolled down Main Street and talked animatedly about the movie that we'd just seen. No, the coolest part was when Caden shivered violently, abruptly, then stopped dead in his tracks. "Whoa," he said, with a bit of a laugh. "I've just got these crazy goosebumps." I turned and began to reply. "That's weird, it's so hot." And before I could say outside, I was thrown into a new world inside my mind. A world where it was not Caden by my side, but a pretty teenage girl. A world in which I was much taller, and could see tanned, lean muscle on my forearm where before there had only been pale skin and freckles. The pretty girl was clutching my arm and laughing merrily. I was in Swiss Knife, on the same part of Main Street where Caden and I had just been walking, and that beginning of fall nip hung in the night air. The street was mostly empty, save for a few people half a block ahead who'd exited the new Cinema 6, a movie theater, in our town, more quickly than us. But what was the rush? I was with Sadie, my best girl, and nothing else mattered. Strangely, I'd also never seen Sadie before in my life, and the term best girl sounded odd to me. Did I mean girlfriend? And why were we both wearing clothes that looked like they could be from my grandparents' photo albums? I felt it just seconds before I saw it. A sense of unease, as if something was very wrong but I didn't know what, and then headlights from the opposite side of the road, veering over towards us. They were so bright that I couldn't see the face of the person driving. All I could see was the car, a bulky, brand new Chevy that by the summer of 2009 might have been sold as an antique. The car struck me with a force I couldn't have imagined, and it hit Sadie too, and then it hit the outside wall of the pizza shop behind us. I was pinned in between. There was no pain. I couldn't see Sadie. My last glimpse of her had been a canary yellow shoe soaring somewhere off to the left. I smelled pizza and gasoline. As my head slumped down on the twisted hood of the Chevy, and my vision blurred, I vaguely wondered if I'd be hurt too bad to play in the homecoming game next weekend. Dude, wake up. I was on Main Street. My head was throbbing badly. And Caden was kneeling next to me, shaking my shoulder. I opened my eyes fully and sat up, hand at the back of my head. What happened? I asked. I dunno, Caden said, eyes wide. You just, passed out. You hit your head. Ha, I said, tears stinging my eyes. From the pain, but also from what I'd just seen. It had been so horrible, so real. Let's go to my house, Caden said, perhaps to stop me from crying. We have Otter Pops. 3 nights later, my grandma, Mom's mom, came over. Dad had moved into a hotel room that day, which I remember finding strange because hotels were places where you stayed when you went to Disneyland and stuff like that. Grandma lived close, so she came to help Mom, who had been crying a lot. I was bewildered by the whole unhappy circumstance but knew my mother well enough not to ask too many questions about it. But there was something else I'd been curious about, too. Grandma, I asked, over dinner. You've lived here your whole life, right? In Swiss Knife? Oh, since I was about 14. Yep, the summer after 8th grade Daddy got the factory job, and that took us here, and I've been here ever since, she said. You know old Buck, excuse me, Mr. Wilfork, down the block? We rented out his basement for a year while Daddy was building the new house. 57, that would have been. No, 58. Or was it? Ah, hell. Mine's not what it used to be. This answer was in keeping with every other answer I'd heard her give about her past, in which she'd answer not only the question you asked but also 5 others you didn't, and then closed by lamenting that her mind just wasn't what it used to be. Did anyone ever get hit by a car on Main Street? I asked. A long time ago, by the sticky shoe? Oh, yes, she said, eyes alight with memory. Dreadful thing. You know, it was Sadie Prentice and that boy she was with. Well, that wasn't her last name at the time, of course, it was, hell, anyway, hit by some out-of-towner, intoxicated off his butt. Mom, my mother interjected. Well, he was. Grandma went on indignantly. Unalived himself, the fool, and that football boy too. Dead right there on the street. And of course, she said, nodding to me, you've seen what happened to poor Sadie. I looked at Grandma, uncomprehending. Mrs. Prentice, Mom said to me. From church. My eyes went wide. Mrs. Prentice, whose wheelchair had been perched in the aisle of our church every Sunday for as long as I could remember. That was her? That was the pretty girl I'd seen on my arm. Inside my mind, puzzle pieces that I hadn't even known existed were rapidly fastening together. Now, why are you bringing up a crazy thing like that? Grandma asked. I shook my head, partially in response, and partially to quell the memory of what Quinn Pleasance's ribs had sounded like when they cracked through his lungs. No reason, I said feebly. Will you pass the corn, please? I never did tell Caden what happened to me on Main Street that day. Not that I had many occasions to, Mom and I moved 3 weeks later.